Hello, I'm Charles Coves, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Coves Show, episode 158, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble or listening via one of the many podcast facilities. In this week's episode, I consider the issues around climate. Is there a climate emergency or not? If there is, then steps need to be taken and I urge you to speak up. If there is no emergency, then we need to speak up against the planned destruction of our current lifestyles, of our current living standards. If you don't know whether there is an emergency or not, then I strongly suggest that it's time that you learn. The threat to your current life and your living standards is very real. I love our planet. I say we have a range of huge environmental emergencies: soil emergency, waste emergency, water emergency, pollution emergency, and more. But I say there is no climate emergency. There is no climate crisis. I say the climate emergency is a scam. It is a fraud designed for the benefit of a global elite who have no concern about your welfare. I urge you to decide your position and to then speak up. Your silence will lead to disaster. To find out why, check out the program. Our format for the show is that I consider the big idea for the day. I give you 6 resources to use in implementing the big idea. I review some key happenings during the past week. And then for newer viewers and listeners, I go through the foundational principles of the show and my background, but regular viewers and listeners don't need to watch that last little piece. So let's get into today's big idea. I urge you to speak your truth about the climate emergency. If you believe the climate emergency talk is a scam, then speak up. I do believe it's a scam. I, on good authority, say that it's a scam, far more than just a belief. If you believe it's a real threat, that there is a climate emergency problem, then speak up. If you just don't know, then learn some key relevant facts, or your life as you know it will never be the same again. Why? Because of the crucial factor of energy availability and energy costs. Already in Australia, there are huge increases in energy costs. Around Europe, there are huge increases in energy costs. Don't believe for a minute that it's the Ukraine-Russian war that's put up energy costs. Energy has a direct correlation to GDP, to birth rates, to the lifestyle that you lead today. Imagine not being able to afford energy. And it's being sold to you as an idea. It's okay not to have enough energy because you're saving the planet. I say BS. And if you don't know, then you better know. The foundational difference between rich and poor countries and the grading of on the 4 levels as the United Nations considers them in levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, not just rich and poor, is electricity. There is the direct correlation between availability of power, of electricity, and GDP. And then when GDP goes up, guess what happens? Birth rates go down. And every single OECD country has a reducing population. Ignoring migration flows, we've got a population decrease. Don't believe for a moment that there's unmitigated disaster with population increase. That's part of the scam message. If you believe the climate emergency fraudsters, and I call them fraudsters, then You want a life where there is highly expensive electricity and not much available. Give you one example of this stupidity of heading towards electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will require huge amounts of extra electricity. It won't be available. So guess what's going to happen? Only the super elite will have their own vehicles. Petrol-driven cars, diesel-driven cars, gas-driven cars, they'll be off the road, all in the name of saving the planet. It's a lie. What they want, these elites, is for only them to be travelling around in vehicles, only them to be travelling around in planes. Are you aware that the United Nations Agenda 2030 is planning to remove most airports around the world, have one airport per country? We have environmental emergencies, but we do not have a climate emergency. We have chemicalised soil. I've been an organic farmer for 47 years. I'm heavily involved with industrial hemp. We have a soil emergency. Australia's soil, where I live, has been dramatically chemicalised, as it has in America, as it has in England, all in the name of increased production. But there have always been less chemical alternatives available. Have a look at the work of Peter Andrews, OAM.com. He articulates clearly the science behind the fact that we have a soil emergency. We have a waste emergency. Look at the plastic in the environment, plastic in the oceans. We have the products that are produced and the waste that is generated. That is an emergency. You look at the Aral Sea in the heart of it's really Eastern Europe. Used to be huge. Now all the water has been used for cotton growing. It's a tiny proportion. It will soon disappear. It used to be a huge sea. We have water pollution. We have air pollution. All of these emergencies, real emergencies that I'm talking about, also impact on your health. We have a health emergency. What you put into your body has a huge impact on your health. That's an emergency. We have lots of problems. And the problems are caused, in many cases, by large corporates who couldn't give a rat's about these environmental problems. And so the whole distraction that goes on, supported by these big companies, is we have to save the planet from their own behaviour. We've got this whole ESG movement, environmental social governance movement, ESG. Learn those letters if you haven't heard them, because frauds are being perpetrated in the good sounding name of ESG. I use the ESG label because many people understand what it means, but there's frauds being perpetrated, so much so that Exxon, an oil producer, gets a higher rating on ESG than Elon Musk's Tesla vehicle company, all right? Because the social principles and the governance principles of Exxon are so lovely. In the meantime, it's pumping out all this pollution contrary to the environmental standards, the desired environmental standards, the minimal greenhouse gas emitting standards. Then you start to look at this fraud, and if you don't look at it because you haven't got time, then you are ripping yourself off. We do not have a climate crisis. We do not have a climate emergency, and it's laughable that King Charles III works with the Mayor of London to get a clock ticking to 2030 to get people terrified about the fact that the level of CO2 is going to cause a massive disaster by 2030, and there's a countdown clock. Fraud. I call fraud. Who's benefiting from this fraud? I'll tell you what Jeff Grimshaw calls the WEFers, World Economic Forum. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, fraudulent materials published. I say cows farting to cause a climate emergency is fraudulent. I say that the environmental costs of producing solar panels and wind turbines and the electronics required to make all them function are so environmentally disastrous that any reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the generation of these incredible installations is totally overwhelmed by the greenhouse gas emissions of producing them, and they're not going to last a long time. And when you look at the huge areas now proposed to be covered by solar panels where the sun no longer gets to the earth, what's that going to do to the planet? I say the production of electric vehicles is also a fraud because of the same reason. It requires I worked at many tons of mining to be able to produce one battery for an electric vehicle. What's going to happen to all these batteries after they're no longer functioning? What happens to all of those? Look at the energy that's required to reuse those batteries. Are they just going to be dumped into the environment? Without baseload of coal, of gas, of nuclear, energy will be unaffordable and unavailable for most people. The elite will not suffer. The elite will profit from all of the government incentives that are being given to this whole decarbonisation scam in the name of climate emergency. Don't conflate the two. A soil emergency, fantastic, we can fix that. Waste emergency, we can fix it. There is no climate emergency. If you don't speak up and share your truth around what you consider, then the loudest voices will sway the day. And that's what's happened in Australia. And so the Greens are pretending to be so caring about the planet. Fraud, I say. Or they're sucking people in who think they're saving the planet because they're simply ignorant. I say people who genuinely believe there's a climate emergency are deeply, deeply ignorant. Don't you be ignorant. The fact that you watch this show means that you're willing to explore possibilities. Speak up. Learn more. If you want two places where you can easily learn more, if you don't like reading books, go to climatediscussionnexus.com. Wonderful resource, videos, scientific data, and Tony Heller's realclimatescience.com. These two websites are enjoyable. They will help you to get the facts, not from a United Nations agenda, because the other issue that you need to understand is that the United Nations is a very questionable organization. It is no longer safe to rely on anything that it says without cross-checking. If you stay silent to get along with others so that people don't get upset, you are doing yourself, your family, your nation a great disservice. My observation is that most people are going along with this climate emergency because the government's driving it so hard, and therefore people are assuming, well, I might be ignorant, the government must be right. Here's my message to you from previous shows and again today. You can no longer rely on your government speaking the truth. If the past 3.5 years haven't shown you that, then you are super ignorant. But if you're watching the show or listening, then I know you are not. These days, people who believe what the government says are amazingly gullible. Don't you be one of those. So, resources. My song by Hadaway, Life Will Never Be the Same Again. It's called Life, but it's a great tune. Life will never be the same again. That's what I'm warning you about. If you let this climate emergency scam go ahead, if you don't believe that it's a real climate emergency, you are putting your life at risk in a very negative way. Remember, availability of electricity is a crucial element in gross domestic product, in lifestyle. Just think about what life's like without electricity. Two very readable, wonderful books. I mentioned Jeff Grimshaw. I interviewed him on my TNT radio show, Trigger Warming. Brilliant book. well articulated, only 130 pages, thin book, got all the data that you need that proves to me, it reinforces the stuff I've learned over the last 30 years that it's a scam. Another book by Michael Rechtenwald, The Great Reset. Excellent book, goes into the whole scam around ESG and woke corporations. So you get 2 books recommended today. My health tip: take ever increasing care about what you put into your body. I've talked about all of the pollution on the planet, all of the emergencies that we have. Well, all that translates to the food that you eat, and then all the chemicalization of the foods, all of the taste enhancers that are put into that food. You are putting all these toxic substances into your body. And let me say that toxicity causes you to have symptoms that mimic influenza, that mimic a cold, because when you put toxic in, your body wants to eliminate stuff that's not good for your body. On the health side, I urge you, take a deep interest into what you're putting into your body. Think about fermented foods, have a huge impact on the functioning of your gut biome. And if you think that you can go into a supermarket and just get all of the packaged stuff with all of the chemicals in it and not pay a price, then again, you are grossly misled. My spiritual tip is to mention from the Bible, John 8:32. And in fact, just look at that number, 8:32. So John chapter 8, verse 32, the truth will set you free. There is a global movement happening. So if you see anybody with 8:32, then you know they are truth seekers. Be a truth seeker. Be a truth seeker around the climate emergency, and then speak up when you discover the truth. Do not hide your truth. Share your truth. Have the debate. We need to have a proper debate around the climate emergency. It hasn't happened. Just like with the scam that we've been experiencing over the last 3 years, we never had one proper debate where experts against the government narrative could speak up against the government narrative. Notice that? No debate. It was a one-sided argument. Well, that's what we have to stomp on. My quote of the day is from Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So what does matter? Coffee. Oh, Julie. Oh, how lovely this coffee is. I love it. I love it. So, spot of humour. Speaking up at work. The managing director called the junior executive into his office and told him, I notice you seem more interested in your work than anyone else. You work late every night. You pay attention to the slightest details. You're always willing to take on new projects. And you're willing to speak up about any improvements or problems or dramas. The junior executive thought he was about to be promoted. But the managing director said, so, you're fired. It's people like you who go out and start their own business, and we don't want you competing against us. So there are dangers in speaking up. Indeed, there are. And there are far greater dangers in not speaking up. You, as a man, as a woman, are designed to speak your truth. Be on your journey. Go on your discovery journey. Do your learning. This is an existential threat. That's how serious this is. That's why you have to make this decision of taking an interest. Don't let the loud mouths driving the climate emergency fraud that I say it is, don't let them cower you into silence. So, take the steps to use today's big idea to decide about how you want to speak up or about what you need to learn, so that you can decide what sort of life you want to be living. This idea can make a big difference to your life. This idea can raise your level of self-confidence. It will raise your level of self-awareness around what you believe. And self-awareness is the crucial element to how you live your life. My aim for this show is to provoke you, educate you, motivate you to constantly go deeper and deeper and deeper inside yourself to understand who you are and what you're about. Please check out our websites, covest.com, charlescovest.com. If you enjoy this show, please share it with your family, with your friends, with your work colleagues. Please subscribe. My books, Passionate People Produce and Passionate Performance, are available at both of those websites. Now, let's review some key happenings during the week. On my TNT radio program yesterday, so go to tntradio.live every Saturday at 4 p.m, but every show is recorded. That's what's exciting about TNT Radio. There is no censorship. My guest was Jeff Grimshaw. We talked about his book, Trigger Warming. The data that he shared in that conversation was gobsmacking, and indeed, governments are now spending more on the climate emergency problem than on military. Right around the world, over $2 trillion predicted to go to $7 trillion of your money being spent on a scam. Think about who's making money out of this money that's being taken from your pocket and moving into big companies. I was very encouraged to see the new Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, a Labor Premier, who announced that he would not put New South Wales' availability of electricity at risk by shutting down coal stations early. Now, there's a clue for you. At last, a Premier in this country acknowledging that renewables, what Jeff Grimshaw calls unreliables, won't be available to replace coal. So Chris Minns has said we're not shutting it down, regardless of what the nonsensical net greenhouse gas emissions percentages may be desired to be. On Thursday in Australia, a Royal Commission reported on what's called the robo-debt, an automated basis for recovering debts owed to the government. The judgments made against ministers and public servants about their behaviour in this robo-debt. Of course, it was a Labor government-initiated Royal Commission, and it was criticising the Liberal government, but the words that they used about these ministers, including the former Prime Minister and public servants, I predict to you will be the same words when a Royal Commission finally gets underway. It might be 5-10 years' time about the public health response that we've experienced in the last 3.5 years. I say corrupt, I say evil, I say criminal, and that will all come out when a proper Royal Commission is held. The problem is in Australia that both sides of government are all in favour of the lockdowns that occurred. Another big issue that happened was the US Supreme Court Judge Terry Doughty coming out and imposing a preliminary injunction against the Biden government from influencing social media companies purporting to impact on the free speech of Americans, because it was the Biden administration that pressured social media companies to shut down commentary on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, silencing people who spoke out against the government. How about that? A preliminary injunction against the government. And then lastly, the Premier of Victoria, front page of the Australian newspaper yesterday, more and more information coming out about the surveys undertaken by the Andrews government to see what it could get away with in terms of lockdowns, in terms of health passports and the like. So the policy wasn't being dictated by good science, but by what the Andrews government could get away with. Have a read of that. It is outrageous, and there will be hell to pay, trust me, because we are being taken for a ride, everybody. I'm talking to you all globally, because what's happening in Australia is also happening in most of the Western world. In the meantime, Julie and I are happy. I'm exercising. Julie's exercising. We take the steps to be healthy and happy. This is the middle of the problems that we are in. I consider we are in the middle of World War III and fighting for our freedoms. We're 3.5 years into a 7-year fight. If you're not willing to fight for your freedoms, then be willing to be locked up. And if you're not willing to fight for your living standards and the availability of electricity, then when you look back and sing those songs, Life Will Never Be the Same Again, you can lament the loss of what you should have fought for. So, if you're new to the show, stick around to the last part for the foundational principles of the show and some more background about me. Again, thanks for watching or listening. Please share if you think I'm worthy to be shared. And until our next show, may your week be full of passion, full of insight, full of a willingness to embrace challenge and ever-increasing self-awareness. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye. And now, for viewers and listeners who want to know more about my background and what else I do with my life, as well as the foundational principles of the show. Here we are. Since 1993, when I left my legal career, a career that I love, to become Australasia's passion provocateur, I have inspired and provoked and educated and motivated people all over the world to discover and pursue their passion. I have helped people via the books that I've written, via speeches at conferences, via in-depth team building programs, workshops over 1, 2 or 3 days, or over 3 months, 6 months. And I've coached people of all ages, one-on-one, from small, medium and large enterprises, government enterprises, helping them to identify the often tiny changes that can make a massive difference. One of my core principles is that freedom is what makes us truly human. That's why one of the greatest threats that government imposes on you to force you to observe its laws is the threat of imprisonment, the loss of your freedom. Just think about that. Government says if you don't behave yourself, we're going to put you in jail. No, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to lose my freedom. That's a reminder to you of why freedom is so important. Without freedom, you and I are not much different to animals. If you were locked up in a cage for the rest of your life, how different would you be to an animal? This commitment to fighting for freedoms for all people is carried out by me primarily through 5 channels. Number 1, preserving the freedom to pursue your passion. Number 2, inspiring you to be able to be free through excellent health. Number 3, helping preserve freedom throughout the world through the expansion of industrial hemp, a magnificent agricultural crop, an almost miraculous crop that enables every community to thrive independently of government. In this way, the power of government to take away freedom is minimized. Number 4, fighting for freedom through legal strategies. So I do work as a legal strategy consultant, as an interface between clients and their lawyers. And number 5, as chairman of the Australian Institute of Comedy and as a board member of the Australian Cartoon Museum, fighting for the freedom of thought and speech through uncensored comedy and humour, through avoiding political correctness in the comedic space. When you block freedom of speech, freedom of thought, that's the beginning of the end of your freedoms. The foundational principles for the Charles Kovess Show are founded on the formula SA plus P equals S. Your self-awareness added to your passion will guarantee that you are successful. And the best definition of success I have found in life is that success is the progressive realization of your worthy ideals. The progressive realization of your worthy ideals. This show is also guided by Socrates' famous principle and quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." You can see I'm wearing my red jacket. I wear my red jacket for all my shows. Red is the colour of passion, so that when you see me on the YouTube version, it reminds you that when you see red in your life, you ask yourself the question, am I pursuing my passion? What am I passionate about? Am I still passionate about that? What might I newly be passionate about? Each week I explore one big idea that can change your life. And it's just one big idea because there's a chance you will remember it. If I give you too many ideas, then we get confused and we don't do anything. Clarity leads to power. Confusion kills passion. Each week I share simple and practical resources that you've heard me describe in the earlier part of the show. A spiritual tip, a health tip, lyrics of a song, a book, a quote, and of course humour. This show is not politically correct. I have no intention of being politically correct. And I love certain addictions, including my addiction to great coffee, my addiction to exercise, my addiction to reading, and my addiction to certain other unmentionable in public type behaviours. Who would know what they are? This show definitely subscribes to the view that we have a spiritual life. So if you don't like discussion of spirituality, this show is not for you. I promise you that I don't include anything in this show that I don't consider to be true and that I have not found to be useful in the work that I've done over the past 28 years, but also over the past 50 years in business, as a lawyer, as a consultant advisor. I only want to share stuff with you that is of value to you. Finally, if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to contact me at charles@coves.com. Again, thanks for watching and listening to my show. Bye.